And the first presentation will be done by Dr. Mark Sanders on the topic, Creating Social Capital for Success in the Energy Entrepreneurship Ecosystem. Dr. Sanders is an Assistant Director for both Clean Energy and Water Incubators, Austin Technology Incubator. He has a vast experience in the clean energy sector and the water incubators. He earned his PhD in energy environment from the University of Texas at Austin and an MBA in innovation and entrepreneurship from Babson College. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. Sanders.
Good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. The first thing I like to do when I'm talking to a group, especially around entrepreneurship, is after getting that great introduction and impressive and everything, I like to remind people that I'm an entrepreneur first. So, you know, I can count 2-3 failures on my part with startups. So, okay. In our group, so we in Austin Technology Incubator, I think I can count about 7 or 8 failures. In terms of startups, there were a couple of successes in there as well. But I do that because I like to remind people of the culture around entrepreneurship. It's it's a failure. Failure is success type of thing. You learn from failure. We grow from failure. Entrepreneurs, they call them serial entrepreneurs for a reason. It's not because they succeed time and time again. It's because they have that mindset. And we hope in venture capital and incubation and everything, it's a numbers game. So we invest in entrepreneurs. And the venture we see them at any particular time may not be the venture that takes off, or may not be the venture that succeeds at that point. But that mindset's there, and you can see that they're a successful entrepreneur, and they're just in the wrong place and the wrong time sometimes. So I like to remind people of that first and foremost. Okay. So this is actually the last slide in my presentation, but knowing that I was going to be after lunch, the first presentation after lunch, I like to kind of give the punchline first, so people may or may not stay with me the entire time. But the thesis here is social capital. After years and years of doing incubation, and we're an organization that's got a business model like everybody else. At the end of the day, our value proposition to the university, to our investors, to the ecosystem, and to our companies is around social capital. Companies need 3 types of capital. You need social capital, which is essentially your connection. That's the ecosystem. That's you as a company or an organization plugging into the ecosystem, and we kind of facilitate that, right? So, social capital, I would argue, is the gateway to the other things that you hear most often. And so when you hear about startups and what they need, or ecosystems and incubators, you're going to hear about financial capital, right? Money. That you'll hear that time and time again, and we were talking about that yesterday. Whether it's Silicon Valley or KFUPM, it's always going to be about how much money is in the ecosystem, and there's never enough. And the other is around human capital. Human capital, meaning we connect people to talent. Whether it's everybody's got different issues there. You may be in an area that's rich in technical or computer IT, but you're scraping bottom to try and find management, operations, those type of people. Or you may be in an area where you've got good people and good experience around management, but you're lacking in technical abilities. So you need these things. It's a 3-legged stool. You need, a company needs all of these things to succeed in the marketplace, and even with all these things, it's still a numbers game. But my argument is social capital is what connects you to the critical things. And as an incubator, that's what we do. That's our value proposition. We have built over a number of years, and I know KFUPM is doing a great job here of the Entrepreneurship Institute, and that's building that ecosystem. You'll hear ecosystem a lot, but ecosystems can exist, and you may not be plugged into them, or your companies may not be getting the benefit from them. And that's where you build value, and that's how you get companies to succeed. And you'll see the theme kind of carried out. The companies that do succeed are the ones that are availing themselves of those resources. And I think we saw that yesterday. There were some great presentations by the staff at EI. talking about mentorship. And you see that play out. So the companies that were taking advantage of mentorship and in the communities. And if there are mentors in the room, I applaud you because you make this whole thing work. We have about 350 in our system, and it's never enough. Your expertise and your abilities and the willingness to share those with entrepreneurs is excellent. So just quickly, the agenda, I'm going to cover, we get a lot of questions as an incubator, just how we do business, how we operate, and that's changed over time, and I'll kind of cover that. Again, we're an organization like everybody else, and things change. It's a dynamic business that we're in. Julie did a great job of explaining. So UT system is very much the umbrella system for the University of Texas, and it covers 18 campuses. Is that right? 13? 14. Sorry, 14. I should know this. 14. There's only one that matters for me. It's the University of Texas at Austin. So I have my biases. But they look at it from a very high level, trying to coordinate and connect all of us. And I get to look at it from a very boots on the ground perspective of dealing with our ecosystem, specifically around Central Texas and around Austin. So some parallels. Admittedly, when I came to, when I was invited to give this talk, and very much appreciative for that opportunity. We do a lot around helping incubators and startup incubators and people in this, around entrepreneurship and building these ecosystems and kind of building an incubator. And I was told it was a 4-year-old incubator, and I'm coming. There's a lot. This is going to be a talk about a lot of the basics. And I got here yesterday and was completely blown away. Right, for 4 years into it, I mean, you would have thought this, the work that Walt's done, that this ecosystem had been around for 10 or 15 years, and I totally applaud their effort. And if you're not familiar with ecosystems and incubators, the work they've done in 4 years is, it's like operating in light speed, especially within a university and academic setting. So the parallels that I drew, and I went back and I was going to change a lot of my slides and or do a pivot. As you were, I realize a lot of the slides are still irrelevant, and probably more so. And just give you a background, for ATI, it was started by George Kametsky, and George Kametsky was an entrepreneur first. He created a company called Teledyne. It went public, did very well, and decided to take on the role of the Dean of Business for the University of Texas at Austin in the 70s, and continued in that role for quite a few years. But it was all vision. Austin, and when he took over, Austin was a government town and a university town, and that was it. We know it today, and it's fairly well known around the world as a very high-tech town, a very entrepreneurial town. But that's not the way it was 34 years ago. And he had a vision. He was a technology guy who had a vision for Austin. And he started, and I liken it. There's so many parallels to me. I mean, and the support he has from the top and the vision here is one thing. But the key was that George Kametsky, and what I see here is the execution on that vision. Making it happen. That is the hardest part. I mean, a lot of people can have a vision, executing on the vision, and then we deal with this with our companies, right? There's a lot of startups that come in, they have a vision, they have an idea. Getting to market's a whole other story. There's a lot of good things that have to happen. So the parallels are great, and I see that here. And I'm so excited for your future here. Just knowing what happened in Austin and seeing the vision and execution here is, I want to come back in 10 years because I'm just I can see it in my mind, and I know you're going to make it happen. So in 1977, George Kametsky set up the IC Squared Institute, which we are a part of, and it was all based around kind of innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, the beginnings, the foundation, if you will, around that entrepreneurship ecosystem. The 80s, again, a lot of parallels. It was a bad time in Texas for the oil and gas industry. People were looking around to diversify, and how do we create new ventures, put people to work? I mean, the parallels are amazing. 1983, they brought in the MCC, which was huge. Again, this is a university and government town, and now we have the Technology Corporation coming in. Shortly after, Semitech, which is the semiconductor industry. So Austin became known as a hub around semiconductor industry, and it was bringing in this research group that was a co-opetition kind of research consortium that brought in all the semiconductor industries, and with it, they all they brought in. So similarly, they brought in the companies brought in their companies, so they wanted to be a part of that ecosystem. And I was looking out the window at lunch, and I see all the major companies here, right, and in close proximity, and you have that same foundation building. And there were gaps. So there are a lot of white space in our ecosystem early on, and we had to fill them, at least to begin with. So we looked around there, and there wasn't angel investors. I know that's a thing. There wasn't that infrastructure there around financing and investment. So we started. So Kosmeski started the first angel group, and it actually in some form exists today as the Central Texas Angel Network. We now have several of them, and there are a number around the state. But it starts with one. It starts with that person who has a vision and who knows there's something missing, and it kind of fills that gap. So these are a couple of our brag slides, but I think I wanted to keep them in because I think it's where you're heading, and I think it's just kind of it's good for you to see. And the numbers are a little bit of a game, but in terms of our incubator, we accept a very small amount of the companies we see. And of those we accept, we have a very high touch model that I'll touch on later, but we have a 90% success rate in terms of getting funding. And that used to be kind of the tagline for the incubator was, we get you funded. I think it's beyond that. My value proposition is more around social capital. Getting funded is just a piece of that. But if you look at what we've done in the last 10 years, it's almost $1 billion in capital raised, a number of exits, and then a portfolio value of over $2.5 billion. There's a lot of ways and a lot of metrics. These are economic metrics, big numbers in terms of exits, but I think there's a lot of ways, especially for a university incubator, to measure success, and you put metrics around how you define success. Companies don't necessarily have to have a huge exit or be a public company, the next Facebook, to be a success. There's a lot of ways companies and entrepreneurs succeed. So the Austin context, to just give you an idea how ATI fits in, of the venture capital raised, we account for about a fifth, so about 20%. 2016 is an anomaly to me, but we're consistently around 20%. So the companies raising venture capital in Austin, we account for a big part of that. And then again, in terms of venture-backed IPOs, ATI companies is almost a third. So our success kind of, after a number of years, kind of speaks for itself. So what is ATI, and where do we kind of position ourselves? So at the University of Texas, we occupy an interesting space because we're a university program, but we're also very much industry facing. We are not funded by the university. We're self-sustaining. Again, that's where the business model comes in handy, and how do we survive as an organization, and how do we stay flexible while meeting the needs of the university. So there's the university-facing side. Oh, and our mascot, I was looking through these. Our mascot is a longhorn, so it's basically a cow with long horns. That I put that in there and realized that probably the context wouldn't be there. But so what do we do from a university-facing side? So the university really wants us to engage. So we report to our vice president of research, and his interest is less on what the slide you just saw. He's not as interested in what are we doing in terms of exits and how many startups are how many billions of dollars we're bringing. What they're interested in is what's our impact to students. What's our impact, with courses? How many courses are we contributing to? And what are we doing to help, to improve the education of students, especially around entrepreneurship and those things. And our focus, quite frankly, gets more tunnel vision around our companies and exiting. So we've developed several programs, and there are different stages and getting taken on by different parties at this point. But one is the Blackstone Launchpad, which is starting up this year, and it's a grant from the Blackstone Foundation, which is part of the Financial Institute, but it's their philanthropic arm, and it's really aimed at undergraduates, just undergraduates who have business ideas that want to come in and get counseling, get mentoring, and really do something with their idea. Then there's the Student Entrepreneur Acceleration and Launch, we call it SEAL, which was funded by the Kauffman Foundation. And it's very unique in that the reason we kind of got follow-on funding is the SEAL is really designed, it's an accelerator for students, but we take a mindset of where we really try to kill, if you will, to kill a venture. And we do that because not all of them should linger on forever. You have a lot of people that are decision points and they have ideas, but not all ventures need to make it. Some of them need to be shut down. We call it fail fast. Have you heard that expression? I mean, that's really what we're trying to get them to do. You know, it's, if they're going to make it, they're going to make it, but we don't want them spending a year and a half, you know, getting strung along and, you know, not make. They could either pivot to a new venture, get a job, do something else. But it's kind of what we're trying to accomplish there. Then there's the 3-day startup. So as if a 3-month accelerator is not a short enough time, we take companies in 3 days, right? So we have people with ideas. They come together over a long weekend with an idea. Sometimes they team up and they try and work through the very basic principles of an idea of a startup, right? And they very limited entrepreneurship knowledge, and we kind of mentor them along. And was giving the talk, and somebody did challenge me, so I'll kind of preempt any questions. You know, can you really actually get a venture in 3 days and get funding? And the answer is yes. We've actually had a company or two out of the 3-day startup that at the end of a long weekend had funding lined up. So it can be done. I'm not saying that's the norm, but there is some legitimacy behind that kind of that pipeline. And then the last one is the I-Core. It's an NSF grant or funded program, and that's really targeted at professors, university faculty, and being an engineer myself. One of the things I went through a learning curve on was selling, understanding customers, right? I mean, it was the last thing I wanted to do when I got out of school and was working. And it really forces somebody with an idea. So a lot of times we call it, a solution looking for a problem. And it's really about those people with that technology or that research that they're trying to commercialize, really going out and talking to prospective customers or finding a market. Is there a market? Understanding what your customers need and working from that angle, which is unique. It's very different from what they're used to doing. Then there's a community-facing part, which is really the ecosystem building, and there's a number of ways that we do this, and probably the majority of our focus. At the end of the day, and it's part of that social capital contract, we are out and about just kind of building relationships constantly. We're a connector. So we do that through and this is specific to the energy cluster that we've developed. We work with the State Energy Conservation Office, the City of Austin, Austin Energy, the utilities around the state. We work with nonprofits or stand-up nonprofits to get partners involved, the U.S. Department of Energy from a federal level, Austin, you name other universities, and it's working with funders. It's working with from a grant side. It's working with investors who are particularly have an appetite for clean energy or deep tech. It's working to develop conferences like this, so you get people in and get a community around that. So there's a number of ways that we touch a lot of different people in that ecosystem, and it's all about connecting. In the long term, it's about connecting our companies to those places so that they can succeed. So I mentioned it, and there was a good slide earlier that kind of showed how the landscape's changing here, and it was happening in Austin as well. So Austin Technology Incubator was founded in 1989. So we had a good 20-year run without any competition, which is awesome if you're a business or a startup or an organization. But if you see, and most of these are accelerators, and they're all mostly for profit, with the exception of Mass Challenge. Came in, so we had a lot of low-hanging fruit, or very easy kind of plays for us in terms of IT and technologies that we had to pivot away from, or starting to, because quite frankly, there's accelerators that can come in and do it faster and do it better. So we refocused as a group, and what we're refocusing on, which is better aligned with what our role in the university, is deep tech. And what I mean by deep technologies are technologies that need an extra long runway. It's usually coming out of faculty research, it's coming out of labs or science, and it's technologies that are usually some kind of hard tech that needs proving, it needs to be tested. I mean, there's a number of things that have to happen for that to get commercialized. And so it requires an expertise that we developed around working with government agencies and grants and that early kind of proto funding areas, and then taking that all the way through. And it just kind of more validation, if you will, around kind of why we're going after that. So if you look at in the United States around R&D, university gets about 15% of that funding. But if you look at value created from an IPO perspective, 45% of those are coming out of university startups. And I think that's relevant to our visit here, because Lyle showed a slide yesterday that KFUVM was, I think, throwing off 100 or so patents a year, or technologies. So it certainly puts you in the same framework that we're dealing with, where with a university in a system that throws off a lot of technology, and you look at there's a lot of value to be gained from some of the easier kind of ventures that can get to market faster, but in terms of long-term success for the ecosystem and really kind of your big meaty kind of ventures, looking at your university tech is a good place to focus. This is going to tie back to the social capital aspect. So ATI takes about 41% or almost half of the licensing and kind of works with companies to commercialize. But if you look at of those 60%, if you look at who's actually getting funding and getting capital, it's the ones that are taking advantage of the social capital that we kind of bring to the table. It's the ones that are using the mentorship. It's the ones that are using the ecosystem. The ones that aren't, are kind of on an island and aren't getting the support and aren't getting the things that they need, the resources to be successful. And again, that's really where the value proposition comes into play. The social capital is what makes those ventures successful. And I threw this slide. So anybody that mentors companies, this is actually kind of like my fun inside joke for anybody that mentors companies or mentors startups, or if you're a venture capitalist and you see a number of presentations, right? I've never seen one where the organization, the company that they're wasn't in a space all by themselves. But I just had a little bit of fun with that, because that's the space we're going after. But you can kind of define the axes that in such a way that you'll be sitting in a market by yourself. So how are we organized? Again, we're under the VP of Research. We probably early 2000s, as an organization, realized that as an incubator, it was kind of too narrow of a focus. Where we pick companies up and where we take them to. Like everybody, we have to develop a pipeline. And that pipeline really was coming from the university-facing programs or suite of programs I showed: the SEAL, the 3-Day Startup, the I-Core, the Blackstone Launchpad. Those are really things that are going to kind of really those companies are going to find their way, or those start to find their way into the incubator. The incubator is a much longer period of time. We work with them for a year, sometimes 2 years, and kind of get them really ready for funding. And then, like I said, I mentioned, we used to be kind of an IT and wireless. It used to be a vertical underneath our flag. It's now something that we see, it's less of a vertical, and it's now across the entire portfolio that we see. So, there really aren't any startups I can think of that don't have some IT, some software, some perspective of IoT, or and I would actually throw artificial intelligence into that now. That's going to be cutting across all of our sectors. So the Clean Energy Incubator that I work for was started in 2001. It was the first one that was founded. I think we've given this talk a number of times, and nobody's raised their hand and said we were first. So we're pretty confident we were the first clean energy incubator. We have a health science, a water that was recently formed that was spun out of the clean energy incubator. The building security, which is all around IT security issues, and which are numerous when you get into the Internet of Things. Mobility and transport, so around like smart cities and those types of things. And then the circular economy, which really is waste stream kind of diversion and doing things like recycling and kind of waste aversion. And then looking specifically at energy, so the University of Texas at Austin, just at Austin, gets about $70 million a year just for energy research. So I mean, there's a whole suite. If you could think back to the earlier slides about taking technology to market. Starting with patents, starting with licensing, and we're throwing off a lot of technology. So oil and gas, I wanted to kind of touch on it because we're here, and some of the portfolio companies we have around, Seismos does some things around big data and data about getting fracking done more efficiently. A lot of water quality, water issues around pulling things out of the ground, trying to do those processes better, make them cleaner. And our sweet spot, so I talked about it, we're really looking, so what we do as an incubator, when we really bring in companies to incubators, that 8% that we're admitting is only to the incubator itself, and that's between pre-seed and Series A, so we try and get them to those rounds. Again, this is kind of where our pipeline's built from. We have the university-facing things, and then we kind of get those into the incubator itself. So 3-day startup I mentioned, companies actually do come out of that. We have a shower stream, which is behavioral things around showers. So people, like I'm at a hotel now, people tend behaviorally to go in, you turn on a shower, and you wait for it to heat up, and there's a lot of water and energy wasted as part of that. They've developed a way to address that issue. Todos Energy is one that came out of our SEAL program, and they're looking at doing basically a competitor to Tesla, the Powerwall, where they're putting the batteries on modularly with the panels themselves. And it was kind of talking about how we talked about how customized approach. A lot of people always want to come to town, and while it does tours, they want to see our space. And the reality is, we've gotten away from being a real estate incubator. We're a virtual incubator in the sense that we don't have a space. We work out of a co-working space, and we meet the entrepreneurs where they're at, and we're available. It's the Y Combinator kind of model. So clean tech, and specifically what it's done, and so much of what we do is around economic development. I mean, that's really one of the reasons we exist. And what we've done since the Clean Energy Incubator has been around is $85 million in economic impact, created jobs. The capital raised, for every $1, this is what the city and the economic development, for every $1 that's invested, it's leveraged by $64 of outside investment. And to the area, that's huge. And what doesn't get told in that story, and we captured in a report, was the clean tech cluster and around Austin that we've helped develop is now worth $2.5 billion and has about 20,000 jobs. So that's all the companies that are coming, not necessarily coming out of the incubators, but it's companies coming because they want to be around the ecosystem. And then it finally did. So it's just kind of hitting the same point. Social capital is what makes all that run. Social capital is what gives companies the advantage. It's the reason you build an ecosystem. It's the reason that you have companies plug and play into it. It's how they get funded. It's how they get the talent they need. It's not easily developed. It's very difficult to develop, but it's what reaps all the rewards. Question? Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm here with the EL, and I'm working on a clean energy startup. I would say, what is your most valid idea for me that I should keep in mind when I work on my startup? What is the biggest issue that faced clean energy startup that you have seen? Thank you.
So I wouldn't say it's specific to clean energy, but I think I'll reiterate it. But it's taking advantage of your mentors, your experts. I mean, using that, getting to so every person that kind of you get out there, if you know what the product is, right, you want to be talking to customers, and you can do that through your through the EI or however you do that. But the more you tap into that network and get built out, the better you're going to position your company or your idea, right? Because you're going to get feedback on it. You're going to test it in a lot of ways, and you're just going to get smarter about how you go to market. What are your holes? But it's not specific to clean tech. If there's a market for something, there's a market. Whether it's clean tech, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's biosciences, it's not. There's nothing specific about getting clean tech to market. As long as there's a market, it's just how do you surround yourself with the resources you need to do that.
My question in brief, how you face the problem of overproducing? Overproducing. Are you optimize everything in your systems, or is it just to get the higher the energy we can get?
Are you asking specifically around technologies, like
Yeah.
is that me or you, about overproducing? So it's not a I think if I'm understanding the question, that would be a technology-specific question, and that would be something that we would tackle, if somebody's coming out with a business idea, or, that's a marketplace consideration, or, sometimes it's forces outside the marketplace. It could be regulatory, it could be other things, but that's a case-by-case basis, right? We're a very customized shop. There's not one thing if you're a company that's like, is this technology, am I going to overproduce, underproduce? And that's very specific to the sector of the this piece of the market you're going after, and where, and some of it's speculative. I would imagine, as to where you think a marketplace is going. I don't know if I answered the question, but I think I don't have any answers that could, that could cut across the entire. One more question.
In the United States, it's very well known that venture industries and the venture capitals usually get away from the capital-intensive industries such as, and technologies such as the energy and the renewable energy. So how do we get around this?
You're asking if so venture capital have stepped
yes.
away from...
And usually the life cycle for investments in the industrial energy is around 10 to 15 years at least, which is above the life cycle of any limited venture capital investment. So how yesterday the World Economic Forum produced a report and some statistics showing that, I just showed this to Dr. Wal, showing that in the United States, the industrial energy gets less than 6% of the venture investments. So how do you manage this in Austin?
So again, that kind of goes back to financial capital is going to be everybody's concern, right? There's never enough money. So I think I'll tell you what we're working on now. So the answer is still if a business looks good, in that there's a market and the return on investment is going to be there, to a venture capitalist, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter unless it's not within their specific area, right, of where they like to invest. If a business is sound, it's sound, and they'll invest in it. What we're trying to address is the earlier stage. So before venture capital, getting companies off the ground, with the angel investors and that kind of money, people are more, individuals typically don't have that kind of, we call it patient capital. And getting after patient capital for clean tech, especially around hardware that has a longer horizon. The places we're looking to kind of fill that gap. One is government's always, so we've had the Department of Energy and they've kind of filled that gap for us, right? I mean, and that could be going away, and it's not something we rely on forever. The other places we look for that kind of patient capital are some angel investors that do have an appetite for deep tech, and there are some. And then the others are family offices, family foundations, so philanthropy groups that are now doing investing, impact investing. It depends on the technology. Right, so that's an interim thing. So again, venture capitalists aren't going to not, if something makes it to that point, where it needs scale up, it's presumably it's got customers, it's got revenue, it's got traction, it's got a market that's attractive. All those type of things you can check the boxes on if you can get it to that point. What the issue we have with venture capital is them wanting to get involved in an earlier stage to kind of prove that concept, to prove that technology out. But once it's to a point, where again, where they can check the boxes, it's a good investment for them. They're about return on investment. They're not about picking, again, unless it's if they have domain expertise in clean energy or around that, or somebody in that group understands at least the market technology, they'll invest in it. Now, if it's not in their wheelhouse, they're not going to invest in it, regardless of whether it's a good investment or not. It's a challenge, but the challenge is earlier, not later.
Thank you very much for this insightful presentation. I believe you've learned a lot from this presentation.